We've all seen lions, tigers, and bears, but most people haven't seen an animal that contains DNA of all three. It's actually possible for certain animal species to be interbred and procreate strange-looking hybrid animals. Today, we'll be taking a look at 15 of the most scary hybrid animals. Number 15. Liger. While we were all laughing as Napoleon Dynamite was drawing pictures of the mythical Liger in his notebook, scientists were laughing at us because the Liger is very real. It's one of the most well-known hybrids to exist, but don't expect to see one on the hunt in the savannah. This artificially created beast only exists in the zoos and sanctuaries that have birthed them. And as the name would suggest, they're the product of a male lion mating with a female tiger. But the kicker here is that these animals grow to be much larger than either of their parents. And while this may sound cool to us, it's actually quite unfortunate for the ligers. They suffer from a bout of gigantism, which causes them to weigh around 1,200 pounds, which is way too much for their body to even attempt to support. So the odds of seeing one running around even in an enclosure are slim to none. So while on paper the idea of a liger is awesome, they live somewhat of a sad existence. Because they're so overweight, it's too much for their body, organs, and heart to take. Most of them die at a young age. But the ligers are fertile, and although uncommon, they can mate with other ligers, tigers, and lions. But that offspring seems even scarier than the liger itself. Number 14. Jaglion. Lions are scary enough in their own right, and so the thought of combining them with a jaguar is downright terrifying. Both of these animals are at the top of the food chain and stalk their prey before going in for the kill. And when you combine these two apex predators, you get the jaglion. A product of an incredibly selective breeding system, the jaglion is incredibly rare and will always be birthed at an animal sanctuary. But one of the most famous jaglions lived in the Bear Creek Sanctuary in Ontario, Canada, and will likely live out their days there, toting the line between lion and jaguar. But their birth was actually a happy accident. A black jaguar had mated with a lioness, and thus these twins were born, and their caretakers have said that these two are inseparable. It's highly unlikely that they would be accepted by either species in the wild, and because they can't breed with other species of their own, they are essentially one-of-a-kind creatures. But one thing you can't deny is they're incredibly gorgeous, taking on the best physical traits of each animal. But if there's one lesson you can learn from nature, it's that the more beautiful the animal, the chances are the deadlier it is. Just make sure you don't turn your back on them, because that's when they strike. Number 13. Grolar Bear. When you're camping, the last thing you want to run into is a grizzly bear. If one of these things takes a liking to you, things probably won't pan out so well. So what would happen if one of these giant predators had their genes crossed with their polar cousins? Well, then you've got a Grolar Bear on your hands. The name may be silly, but the Grolar Bear is not to be trifled with. And unlike previous entries, these are more likely to turn up in the wild than in a zoo or sanctuary. Back in 2006, an odd-looking bear was shot in the Canadian Arctic, and after some DNA testing and plenty of head-scratching, it was confirmed that this was in fact a hybrid animal. So how does something like this even happen? Don't grizzlies and polar bears have their own respective territories? This one is a little sadder, and it's likely that these two bears came across each other due to climate change. As we all know, polar bears have been running out of space in the Arctic regions, so they've been moving south into grizzly country, and you can figure out the rest from there. But since that initial sighting, more and more hunters are reporting Grolar Bear sightings, and it's likely that there will be even more in the future. Number 12. Zonkey. A zonkey is not a zombie donkey, but the fact that this hybrid animal exists is creepy enough. When you mix a zebra with a donkey, you get the strange cocktail that is the zonkey. And because both animals are equine, breeding two successfully is pretty easy to do. But the chances of a zebra and a donkey falling in love with each other in the wild are pretty low, so you can bet that any zonkey in existence is a product of both science and selective breeding. And luckily, much like its parents, the zonkey is anything but deadly, unless killing somebody with cuteness is a thing. The zonkey is able to retain traits from both parents that give it its coat, and so they'll typically have zebra lines on their legs, but they'll still give you that iconic hee-haw if you get a little too close. Perhaps they've retained the best of both worlds then. But the only catch with the zonkey is that these guys are a one-time deal, meaning they can't produce any young, making each iteration one of a kind. And if you ever get down to Tijuana and see a fully striped zonkey, chances are it's just a donkey with those black and white stripes painted on. But if you want to catch a glimpse of this wild hybrid, your best bet is going to be at a special zoo. Number 11. Humpless camel. If you're lucky enough to see a camel in person or even ride one, the first thing you're going to notice is the hump. But what about humpless camels? Also known as camas, humpless camels are the product of a camel breeding with a llama. And while you may not realize it, llamas and camels aren't that too far from each other in the gene pool, so this hybrid animal isn't as rare or tough to create. This is an interesting animal because while it may look like a small camel, you'll immediately notice the hump is missing. But they do take on the llama's coat, meaning they are extra soft. While not as large as a camel, an adult cama can weigh up to 6 times as much as a llama. But because these can only be made via artificial insemination, you'll never see one out in the wild. Plus, think about where each animal lives in relation to the other. That just can't happen. The very first cama on record was bred in 1998, with the goal of producing more wool than your straight-up llama because of its size and more cooperative temperament. So originally, llamas were too small and camels were too tough, and in just 10 years, another 5 camas were produced. Number 10. Beefalo. Humans love beef. We love burgers, and steaks maybe a little too much sometimes, and it can feel like there aren't enough cows to satiate our appetites. So naturally, scientists are always thinking of ways to really beef things up, which is why they created the beefalo. The product of a human-led breeding program, you get a beefalo when you mix a male cow and a female bison. And unlike some of the other hybrids we've seen, the history of the beefalo goes back a few hundred years. The first recorded beefalo sighting was in 1749, when they were accidentally bred in the American South. But about 100 years later, settlers began creating beefalo in the hopes that they would provide both more milk than cows and survive the harsh winters. Think of them as super cows. The beefalo was tough to manage, but they were a success nonetheless because the majority of them were able to produce offspring. But cut to a few centuries later, the meat industry is booming and manufacturers are employing scientists to help them produce more and better meat. So now, the beefalo comes in again, offering not just more meat, but leaner and with less fat and cholesterol than your average cattle. It's an odd animal with an odd history, and perhaps even an odder future. Number 9. Hinny. If you thought the zonkey was one freaky hybrid animal, then just wait until you hear about this one. The hinny is a product of a match made anywhere but heaven, a female donkey mating with a male horse, and so the hinny is essentially the opposite of a mule and looks much smaller than its well-known cousin. But instead of being a smaller, more demure hybrid animal, this one is strong, really strong. Hinny have some tough legs, so despite their size, they can give you just a little more bang for your buck than the average pack animal. It's quite an interesting characteristic. And unlike the mule, the hinny is a little easier on the eyes, with a more and overall better-looking mane. So, the hinny has beauty and brawn. But how about brains? Well, maybe not so much. It may not be the sharpest tool in the shed, but they certainly know how to get the job done. The biggest question here is, why do you get a mule when you cross a male donkey with a female horse, but a hinny when you have the inverse pair? It all comes down to the dominant traits of the mother. So, because the hinny's mother is much smaller than the horse that sired it, you get this small in stature hybrid animal.
Thanks for watching my video and subscribe for my YouTube channel.